Hello everyone, my name is Joyce Ohiri, and today I will be talking, essentially proposing recommendations towards an integrated health policy to help patients and physicians better navigate patient health care when concerning oncofertility. So meet patient X. Patient X is a woman of reproductive age, and she has cancer, specifically a gynecologic cancer such as ovarian cancer, and she is looking to have a child. However, she is currently undergoing cancer treatment, so she wants to consider what her options are. So some questions that come up in a patient's mind are, how will I afford it? Obviously, having a child, especially when your reproductive system is compromised, is quite costly. Will they consider my beliefs? There are certain lifestyle beliefs that can steer your decision for oncofertility in one way or the other, and will I let society dictate my choices? Obviously, there are gender roles in society where a woman is expected to have a child, so those can burden a patient when deciding whether or not to undergo oncofertility. However, when the patient does interact with a doctor, there is also an intimidation factor. So although they are thinking a lot of these things, what they really do say is, how can I conceive? Patients may not disclose all of their concerns to their doctor, or their doctor may not disclose all of their options to the patient. And that's primarily the target of what I'm going to get at. So just some background, oncofertility is a study of promotion of the preservation of fertility in cancer patients. So as I said before, with cancer, your reproductive system is compromised, and so it's really a quality of life concern where patients are looking to preserve their fertility so that they can hopefully conceive after when they are in remission. So this concept, or this term, was coined by Teresa Woodruff from Northwestern University, and currently there are 4 core institutions within the oncofertility consortium: Northwestern, UPenn, University of California, San Diego, and Oregon Health and Science University, and there's also affiliate institutions along with that. So the timeline of events: so first the patient will discuss with their doctor their options while they are undergoing treatment, and next, if the doctor feels they are viable enough to continue on to oncofertility, they will then move on to those steps, and that really mainly concerns preserving ovarian tissue in liquid nitrogen over time, and then when they're ready, they can again go on to usually in vitro fertilization, because at that point they will need artificial means in order to conceive. So what the experts are saying, so I interviewed, as I'll talk later on, 3 people, so these are just 2 perspectives. So Andrea Kalfoglu, who's a professor in the Sociology and Health Department here, and Dr. Gregory Dolan at the University of Baltimore School of Law. And so when I spoke with Andrea Kalfoglu, who's a mother herself, she mentioned, and I quote, "Women are devastated if they can't have their own biological child, and usually that psychological factor can influence their decision." And also Gregory Dolan mentioned, if the patient is on top fertility preservation, they can't ask these questions. So oftentimes the problem is that doctors have their own perspective, where they feel like the patient is not viable, either because they can't afford it, their medical condition is too severe, or other factors, and they actually won't tell their patient at all what their options are. And so if the patient doesn't know what their options are, how can they ask? Some of my goals: last semester I did an independent study where I mainly looked at what ethical, social, psychological, and philosophical or legal impacts there were to patient decision making, and now I'm kind of going further and expanding that research to apply those concepts towards proposing mandates towards an integrated health policy. So this is just a concept map. My core disciplines are philosophy, sociology, psychology, and those are mainly the 3 disciplines where I was exploring what ethical issues there are concerning oncofertility that impact patient decision making, and then essentially health policy, which I will use as a driving force towards proposing those recommendations. So this is just their own concept map created within the oncofertility consortium. as you can see the interactions between different people. So obviously a cancer patient must consult their family because their family will be involved in whatever decisions they make towards expanding their family, potentially. Oncologists must consult with the reproductive endocrinologist because, as I said, there are two illnesses at hand. It's not only cancer, but it's also infertility. And also the consortium deals with expanding education past the consortium. So getting the right advocacy and letting people know that this is an issue so that people can take it more seriously, for instance, getting more coverage for patients. So my methodology, I did literature reviews, so I looked at a lot of primary papers. I attended the Oncofertility Conference where I interacted with other researchers, doctors, advocate representatives that are involved in oncofertility and gained information from there. And I also conducted interviews with three. So I talked about Andrea Calfogli and Dr. Dolan, and also Mary Ellen Pavone, who works directly with the consortium. My policy hopefully will take what I've learned from philosophy, sociology, and psychology, and I will be able to integrate those towards proposing sound recommendations. So I came up with mandates from the readings and my experiences, and just my own perspectives of what I thought. I have a list of 9, but I'll just highlight some. So for instance, establishing policies based on sound, relevant ethical principles. I think a lot of the issues that come about when choosing whether or not to undergo fertility, or even physicians, whether they want to disclose information, is a lot of ethical issues arise. So just having a set of principles that can ground the foundation will create a framework so that everyone is behaving in an ethical manner. Also considering values of patients that may intervene. Obviously religion comes to a factor, and other family influences as well as lifestyle influences may play a role. And also considering social and psychological factors, because there are a lot of external factors outside of that, such as societal beliefs and even the depression that comes along with not being able to have a child that can influence one's decision. So bridging disciplines, I touched on in my research 3 different bridging strategies. So advancing through checks and balances, bridging the explanation-action gap, and building complex and multicultural explanations. So first, advancing through checks and balances according to Miller and Boston and Sia. The definition is pretty much continuing use of different disciplinary perspectives as checks on one another. So the way I did that was, well, the first point is cross-communication between different fields, and how I tackled that was to establish a board of professionals from different fields. And so there are a lot of people involved in terms of health professionals in the patient decision-making process and navigating patient health care. And so I, as you'll see later, I kind of sanction the professionals so that it's not as intimidating. And that also establishes more integration between different fields. And also streamlining patient and interdisciplinary professional interactions. So again, sanctioning these groups is just a way so that not so many people are inundating or bombarding these patients with their ideas, but that all these ideas are getting relayed to the patient with less people involved. Bridging the explanation-action gap, which is integrating disciplinary contributions that is common in applied fields. So, as I talked about, I explored the ethical, social, and psychological factors that affect patient decision-making. So, highlighting the pressing issues and making them aware so that people know that they exist. And also affecting change to incite action through health policy. So, using that education and advocating for oncofertility patients to gain more coverage or to have more rights as patients in learning and getting full disclosure of oncofertility and having those options. And that goes along with proposing recommendations for this health policy. We're putting the patient first. And lastly, building complex and multicultural explanations. Oncofertility within itself is an interdisciplinary field, so it requires interdisciplinary reasoning. So that is pretty much defined as borrowing concepts and findings from a variety of disciplines to construct complex explanations of a phenomenon under study. So encouraging frequent interactions between disciplines, so that could mean getting professionals together in one room at conferences or meetings, or even before speaking with the patient, and also integrating ideas because a lot of these professionals are involved, and so making sure that each one of them knows the other perspective will give the patient a more thorough understanding. So as you can see, these are some of the members of the oncofertility team, obviously the patient and the family, the oncologist, who's actually performing the cancer treatments, the oncology nurse, the gynecologist, a social worker, just to monitor them as well. Financial specialist, IVF does cost a lot of money, so making sure that these patients have the right funds to cover, especially when their health insurance cannot fully cover as well, and along with these other professionals. And so these may look like a lot, that's 16 members, but if I group them, and from this group interacting with the patient and the primary physician, you have one representative from each group, and that representative can interact with the patient and primary physician. So in this way, it's pretty much streamlining the process because you have everyone's perspectives, but you're sanctioning the groups, and from there arises one representative. So there's only 4 people interacting with the patient, and it's a lot, but it's not as much or intimidating as if you had all 16. So this discussion, oncofertility, as I said, is an interdisciplinary concept. So it requires interdisciplinary reasoning. So just having all these fields and professionals interact will create that dynamic for that patient to have a sound, thorough understanding of what their options are. Health policies should integrate disciplines and perspectives across the board. All these disciplines are very much important, and so making sure they're highlighted and addressed is imperative. And also group professionals to alleviate burden and limit intimidation for patients. So that goes along with sanctioning the groups and having a representative from each so that the patient is not intimidated but still gets the full understanding of what their options are. And communication and integration. So education and advocacy is probably one of the most important outside of communicating with the patient, and so making sure that these issues are aware and these patients are advocated for is important to getting them the care they need. These are my references. I would like to thank Stephen McAlpin, my INDS mentor, Dr. Giraj and Richard Wilson, my faculty mentors, the interviewees, Andrea Kalfoglu, Dr. Dolan, who's also acted as a mentor outside of the interview, Dr. Melanie Allen Pavone, and the INDS faculty and staff. Questions?
So these are very busy professionals. When I think about the stakeholders, especially the health professionals, they're very busy already. So from like a checks and balances standpoint, doesn't this add a lot of time, this extra communication among professionals? How is this actually going to work? Where are they going to find the time for this coordinated effort and briefing each other? How would you do that?
Even now, there's a thing called grand rounds where a lot of doctors will say, like pretty much once a week as a board of individuals and discuss cases individually. So those are pretty much medical doctors that do that, and so I think inviting these other professionals to those, since those are already set up, will be a space for them to do that. So they are sanctioned once a week to talk about each case individually, so since they are already in place, I think that, for instance, having a family planning specialist there and a genetics counselor and a financial specialist will help bring in other factors that affect patient decision making.
But aren't grand rounds more of a quick briefing, or is it more of a discussion? I mean, in terms of if you really want stakeholders to talk, and Richard can talk more about this, but are grand rounds a balanced discussion of perspectives in your opinion, or are they primarily a presentation by a leading authority?
From my opinion, it's just they're talking about a case and delving into it and getting perspectives from all physicians that are involved in the case. I do think expanding would take time, but I think there is a way, or even doing it at conferences or doing it on their own accord. And it would be great if all 4 representatives could interact with each other, but even having it just, if the subgroups could just interact in some way, expand the grand rounds, that would be most beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you said that having these mandates in place would, or group professionals coming together would decrease intimidation of the patient.
Mhm.
Why intimidation and not like fear of the whole process in general? Like, so you're preserving your eggs and things like that because you're going through cancer. So why not apprehension as opposed to intimidation?
Right, so all those factors are involved. So intimidation always meaning where you don't want to have 6 professionals individually talking to a patient, especially if you have a patient that is an immigrant or has low education, they won't really understand all that's coming to them. Apprehension, that goes along with having a social worker there, an adoption professional, even the pastoral care and clergy. There are professionals set aside that don't just talk about the medical reasons, but also talk about the other factors. So that, in essence, having them in place would help with that. Yes.
I do have one.
Okay, so when you went to the conference and then you interviewed all these people, was there any kind of a discussion of sort of a timeline? Because it seems to me that there's several times they're involved in this. Somebody could do something, one patient could do something where they have to actually make a decision about whether or not they have some kind of treatment or not, because
Right.
it's going to impact their reproductive decisions. And then what happens is you could have somebody who has the treatment, and they have to sort of see a reconfigured set of stakeholders, because now there's going to be a different set of people involved to a degree and
Right.
different kind of recommendations. Was there a discussion of that at
In the
conference?
readings, yeah, well, when the conference, I mostly talked about the global efforts for expanding oncofertility, but in my readings, I did touch upon that. So, obviously there would be a shift, so a lot of doctors, even if they did make these options available to the patients, wouldn't be able to predict what medical conditions could arise. So for instance, fertility preservation can either delay or interfere with cancer treatment. And so if that's the case, doctors will want to push it. So all these, even if you have this whole system set up, at the end of the day, not everyone would be involved. And even if a medical situation arises, even after you're going along this path, that could also shift what stakeholders are involved. So it's really case dependent. And based on that, that's actually why a lot of physicians choose not to let their patients know, but I think full disclosure is necessary regardless.
So it's case by case.
Yes, it's very specific.
I was just wondering, you've mentioned multiple times how expensive
Mhm.
fertility can be. So I'm wondering, what's the current state of healthcare coverage?
Right, so
For people in this, for who would be undergoing IVF because of oncofertility, are there any caveats currently?
Right, so I know they are trying to expand more care for infertility. And I think the average IVF price is around 10 grand, maybe it's more than that, around 10 grand. I'm not sure just how much they cover. I know that it is covered now, and they are trying to expand coverage, and even more so, kind of drawing that line between patients that are infertile and patients that are infertile but have cancer, and making sure the patients that are infertile with cancer get even more attention and more care, because they are battling 2 illnesses versus 1. Yes.
So I noticed that a lot of the bridging strategies you were talking about were in the form of the recommendations that are sort of the end point of your project.
Right.
And yet you're going to a conference very early on in your project. Did you see any overt mention of interdisciplinarity at the Oncofertility Conference or in your reading even?
Right, well, the Oncofertility Consortium itself does really promote interdisciplinary work. So they had a lot of social workers, even the people I interacted with, social workers, researchers, medical doctors, psychologists, people in education. So they in themselves do really promote the field of interdisciplinary research. So I saw that just interactions with them and what their efforts were to promote that as well. They had a lot of bioethicists there, people who specialize in religious studies, health policy workers, lawyers, and so on and so forth. So within themselves, they really do put the effort to make sure.
But am I hearing you right, that their recipe was essentially throw them all into a room and the interdisciplinarity will happen?
Right. So are you saying like between interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary and really integrating?
Sure, go there, but I'm just saying that when you talked about the bridging strategies
Right.
that you learn about in 330 or 480, you have a very deliberate language for saying, I see a problem, I see it in these terms, here's what I would do about
Right,
it.
right.
You weren't seeing that at the conference or in the literature?
Right, so at the conference, I was saying, I guess, if you wanna, for like technical terms, more multidisciplinary.
Gotcha.
So that they are all present, but I'm not too sure how much more they're like actually integrating versus being present and working separately. I do think that there should be more integration. So far, they're doing a great effort, but this is an emerging field and an emerging technology, so there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, could I just follow on that?
Yeah.
Because how important is bioethics, which is, I mean, it's in the Miller and Boyks-Mansilla literature as a compound concept. How important is bioethics in oncofertility and at the conference you went to? You said there were bioethicists there.
Yeah, there are bioethicists, even bioethicists within the lab of Dr. Woodruff. I think it's really important because although it's more of a, such as like the explanation action gap, it's less more of applying, well, it's more of taking what you learned in the concepts of bioethics and applying them. So there are a lot of ethical concerns that can arise either from a religious standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint, from a societal standpoint, psychological standpoint. So I think bioethicists, they definitely play a big role in the Oncofertility Consortium because there are specific bioethicists that work there, either from partnering universities or within the Oncofertility Consortium itself. So they do have a significant place, and I think more so understanding what those ethical implications are and trying to find ways to tackle them and make sure that they are addressed and acknowledged.
Well, once again, well done.